Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a dim and drafty room where the only sound is the quiet scratching of quills. Across parchment and even that feels like it might be too loud. You're not in a castle, or a battlefield, or a royal court. Tonight? No, tonight, you've wandered into something much quieter, but somehow more unsettling, medieval monastery scriptorium. It's the kind of place where the air feels stained with centuries of ink, and the walls seem to listen more than they echo. You ease open a thick wooden door. It creaks, of course, because doors in stories always creak. But this one's groan. Feels more like a warning. The smell hits first: cold stone, beeswax, damp wool, and that bitter, metallic scent of iron gall, ink, the good stuff. The kind that stains your fingers for days and your soul for years. Or so the old monks say. You tiptoe past rows of heavy desks, each with a tallow candle flickering in the corners, casting little orange halos on the walls. Some candles have burned low and curled sideways, like they're trying to crawl away from their holders. A monk glances at you but says nothing. No one speaks here. Words are only meant for parchment, and even then, only after fasting, prayer, and the full blessing of Saint Jerome himself. You get the feeling that even if you whispered something out loud, the ink bottles on the shelves would rattle in protest. You settle in, one of the brothers nods to you, silently offering you a quill, just a feather, sharpened, trembling slightly in your hand. The parchment is already laid out, blank, thick, waiting, and next to it, a small pot of ink that looks darker than midnight and twice as patient. You dip the quill just a little, and for a moment, just for the briefest second, you think the ink ripples when it sees you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is there, so drop that in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You lean in, the quill scratches its first hesitant syllable, and the room seems to exhale around you. There's a rhythm here, slower than breath and deeper than thought. You feel it under your skin, like the tick of a quiet clock that doesn't want to be noticed. The monk beside you shifts, and the bench groans under his weightwood, older than memory, resisting the moment just a little. They say ink is only dangerous if you don't respect it, and you're starting to see why. Because this place, this whole monastery is built around silence, but not the peaceful, meditative kind. This is the kind of silence that hums with something just underneath it, like the quiet before lightning, or the second before a page turns by itself. You try to shake off the feeling you're just writing, right? Just copying words from one parchment to another. How could that be dangerous? But still, no one's laughing, and no one is speaking. Even when the ink clings too thickly to your quill, even when your hand cramps, even when your candle flickers and casts to shadows instead of one still, no one says a word. You think you hear a sigh, but it might be the wind, or the parchment settling, or something else. The monk to your left is murmuring to himself now, just under his breath. A prayer, a spell, a warning. You glance over, but his face is hidden by his hood, and the words keep coming so low you can't quite catch them, but insistent, repetitive, like someone rehearsing an apology they don't want to make. Across the room, another monk slowly dips his quill. The ink bottle gurgles. You wonder how many pages have been filled here, how many names written, how many erased, because something about the ink doesn't feel finished when it dries. Maybe it never really dries at all. There are whispers always, whispers that monks once swore their letters changed shape at night. That tidy script turned, crooked, twisted like vines, that words copied in the light of day looked different when read by candlelight, that some pages bled backwards. You keep writing, slowly, carefully, because the last thing you want is to make a mistake. Asterisk, you're not sure when you started holding your breath, but your chest feels tight. You exhale slowly, letting it out through your nose so you don't make a sound. Across the stone floor, a draft creeps in from under the door. The candle flames lean away from it as if trying to escape. You look down at your parchment, still blank. The few lines you thought you wrote must have been in your head. Or maybe the ink drank them back in. There's movement to your right. A hunched, broad-shouldered monk stands and shuffles toward the far corner of the scriptorium, where a window sits just below the ceiling. It's barely big enough to fit a face. He reaches up and cracks it open. The cold outside breathes in like it's been waiting all night to enter. The temperature in the room drops by degrees you can feel in your bones. That kind of cold that slides under your robe and licks at your spine. The other monks don't seem to notice, or maybe they're used to it. You can't tell. Your candle sputters. The flame wobbles violently, then corrects itself, burning lower than before. Its glow looks more orange now. Sickly, you nudge it back with a finger so the wax doesn't drip on the manuscript. One of the monks once got sent to garden duty for a week after ruining a page that way. You've never seen someone look so ashamed to be holding a trowel. The scriptorium is designed for suffering. That's the point. Long wooden benches too low for comfort. Stone walls that hoard the cold and never let it go. Windows too small for sunlight, too high for escape. It keeps the distractions out and the silence in. They say the room was built facing east so that at dawn light touches the first page before it hits the floor. You're not sure if that's poetic or just wishful thinking. The sun hasn't made an appearance in days. You dip your quill again. The ink seems thicker than before. It clings to the feather like molasses. You blow gently on the parchment, trying to dry the last word you wrote. It smears. You wince. A monk 2 seats down looks up. Just for a second, you look back down. The benches groan when anyone moves. The wood is older than the monastery itself, or so you've heard. Some of the beams were salvaged from a shipwreck, or a cathedral, or a gallows. Depends on which monk is telling the story and how badly they want you to stop asking questions. You flex your fingers. Your knuckles ache from the cold, or from writing, or from holding your breath again. It's all blending together, and still you keep going. That's the unspoken law here, right through the cold, right through the cramp, right through the silence. The only acceptable noise is the scratch of a quill and the soft exhale of concentration. Anything else is indulgence. There's something monastic about that kind of endurance, and something terrifying, too. Because if no one speaks, no one questions. No one interrupts the ink once it starts to flow. A bell tolls somewhere outside the room. Not loud, not urgent, just enough to remind you that time is passing, even if the script on your page doesn't show it. The monk across from you shifts. In his seat, his hands are blackened fingers stained from years of ink. They say it never comes out, that once the iron gall sets in, it tattoos your skin forever. One monk joked that their soul would arrive at heaven's gates with script still clinging to the fingertips. Then he was reassigned to candle making. You look at your own hands. The stains have already begun, and the cold, it's not just from the cracked window now. It feels like it's rising from the floor, from the stone beneath your shoes, as if the building is exhaling slowly, and all it knows is winter. It's not just temperature either. It's a feeling, like the room is trying to numb you, not just your hands, but your questions, your resistance, your curiosity. It wants you calm, empty, ready to copy without thinking too much about what's being copied. Because that's what you're here for, isn't it? To become invisible behind the words, to let the ink use your hands. You shift in your seat and hear a strange creak not from your bench, but from behind you. You turn, slow and casual, pretending to stretch. Nothing, just shadows, but they feel thicker than before. You glance back at your parchment. There's a blotch forming near the edge. You didn't put it there. You glance at your quill. It's dry. So what, exactly, is still writing? Asterisk. You reach for the inkwell again, slower this time. It's still sitting in the same place, still full, to the brim with that midnight black fluid. But now it looks ... different. Less like a liquid, more like a bruise caught in a jar. You give it a tiny swirl. No ripples. It doesn't behave like ink should. It's too still, too patient. The quill dips in with a faint sucking sound, wet wool, or something worsened. You wonder how old this batch is. Ink isn't supposed to last forever. It thickens, separates, curdles in the cold. But the monks never seem to replace it. Just stir it now and then with a silver spoon that no one talks about. It's made from iron salts and crushed oak galls. They say vinegar, a little, water, sometimes wine, sometimes ... other things. You're not supposed to ask. You definitely don't ask Brother Callistus, who's the only one allowed in the ink room. He carries the key on a cord around his neck like it's a relic, and he smells faintly of burnt rosemary and rust. The legend goes that the best ink requires sacrifice. Not animal, not human, nothing so dramatic, just something personal. A memory, maybe, a truth, something small that won't be missed at first. The ink keeps it safe, uses it, and when you run out of things to give, well, your writing starts to look an awful lot like someone else's. You squint at the sentence you just finished. The letters are clean, but unfamiliar, like someone else's handwriting has begun to ghost through. Yours, the curves are too smooth, the lines too confident. It's like your hand knew what to write before your brain did. You blink, you try again, same thing. You rub your fingers together. The ink has started to dry along the edges of your nails, flaking. Like old paint, it smells faintly metallic, like old coins and something vaguely sweet. A rotting apple kind of sweet. The kind that hides behind spice. To your left, a monk coughs once. He doesn't stop writing. The candles are burning lower now. Their wax puddles gather slowly, like tiny, melting clocks. Time is bending. There's a shelf at the far end of the room lined with ink bottles. Not the neat, labeled kind you'd find in a modern shop, but mismatched glass vials with wax-sealed tops and cryptic symbols painted in faint red or soot black. Some are cloudy, some are nearly empty. One looks like it's full of ground, bone suspended in honey. You're not sure if you're supposed to know that. You once heard that the oldest inks used crushed wasp nests. Others used soot from burned manuscript sashes of older texts reabsorbed into new ones. Recycling in the creepiest sense. One monk claimed the most precious ink in the library was made from the charred remains of a forbidden book. Its pages boiled into a final, desperate truth. Historians still argue whether monks truly used ritual inks in such a manner, or if it was just whispered legend designed to keep novices from peeking at the shelves too long. But as you stare at those shadowy bottles, you're not entirely sure it matters. There's a scraping sound nearby. Someone adjusting their quill, maybe, or sharpening it against their boot. Or something less mechanical, something slower, like fingernails on old vellum. You turn your head a fraction. No one's moved, but the air feels tighter. You return to your page. You were in the middle of copying a psalm. Or was it a warning? You reread the last line you wrote. Deliver me from evil ink, O Lord. You blink, that's not the verse. You're sure of it. You look back at the source. Manuscript, it's too faded now to tell. You breathe in, the cold ink smell reaches deep. Something about it pulls at the back of your throat. Not unpleasant, just magnetic. You were told not to sniff the ink too long. Not for health reasons, for other reasons. Things you can't remember now. You look around. All the monks are still writing. Heads bowed, hands moving steadily. Except one at the far desk, his hand has stopped. His quill rests upright in the ink, like it planted itself and took root. His eyes are wide open, staring forward. You blink, and he's writing again. Same pace, same rhythm, like nothing happened. Your candle gutters suddenly, throwing your shadow. Across the page, the ink gleams in that strange way oil does when it tries to look like water. You lean in, squinting dot for just a moment. You swear you see your own name written in the margin. You didn't write that, and even worse, you don't remember telling the ink what your name was. Asterisk, your hand hovers above the page. You're not sure whether to write your name over it, blot it out, or pretend you never saw it. Maybe if you just keep copying, the ink will forget what it heard, because that's what it feels like now, that it's listening, not passively, like an inanimate substance, being moved by your will but actively, hungrily, like the ink is aware, like it's watching from below the surface, waiting to be fed. You dip the quill again. The tip meets the ink like a beak to water, and you swear it moves before you touch it. A ripple, or maybe a twitch. You've been told the monks didn't always use ink like this. That once it was homemade. Simple, harmless, crushed berries, soot, gallnuts, soaked for weeks. Back then, ink was alive in the way rain is alive, natural, neutral, forgiving. But over time, needs grew. Scripts became more demanding. Manuscripts multiplied. The ink had to last longer, had to be darker, had to resist fading for centuries. So they experimented, added new ingredients, more iron, less water, strange plant resins, animal byproducts, salt, wine, vinegar, things from the apothecary's back shelf. And then something changed. One of the abbots no one knows which century started recording dreams, not just his own, but those of the other monks. He'd ask them what they saw in the night, who visited them, what was said. He'd write it all down in a red ledger with no title, red ink. Always red, always the same small jar, never refilled. The ink was never supposed to last that long. They say when the abbot died, the jar still wasn't empty. Now that same jar sits somewhere in the scriptorium, unlabeled. No one admits to knowing which one it is. But the dreams haven't stopped. You glance at your own page again. Something's different. You've been copying, yes, but the words are starting to shape themselves. Less biblical, more poetic. Less Latin, more local. Your own language. Slipping into the margin, slipping into the spaces between verses. You don't remember writing the ink once quiet. But there it is, 3 lines down, curled like a sleeping worm between the staves of a chant. You look around. One of the monks, Brother Eman, stretches his neck slowly, vertebrae cracking like someone walking across ice. He doesn't look up, just keeps scratching his quill along the parchment, dragging it like a stylus over skin. You suddenly remember that these pages were once animals. The skins are scraped clean and smooth. Vellum, calfskin, sometimes sheep, sometimes goats, but always something that had once breathed and blinked, and ink behaves differently on vellum. It soaks in slower, pulls more darkly, reacts to the oils in the parchment. Some say it remembers the shape of the creature's last breath. You place your palm flat on the page. It's warm. Not from your touch from within. Historians still argue whether this belief of skin memory, of conscious vellum is superstition or science. Whether it's just the way iron gall ink reacts to proteins, or if the pages themselves hold memories. But here, in this candlelit silence, it's very hard to feel scientific, because now the letters are warping slightly. Just a bit, tilting, angling like they're leaning toward each other, whispering. One forms a small blot. It spreads, slowly, forming the shape of a tiny, closed eye. You blink, look away, look back, gone. Gone, you tell yourself you're tired. The air has thickened again. There's a taste now, metallic, milky, almost like the scent of old bandages. You look up at the arched ceiling. There's a shadow on one of the ribs. It could be a spider. It could be nothing. You focus on the margins again. This time, there's something scratched faintly into the edge of the parchment. Something you definitely didn't write. Tiny, just 5 letters. She. The ink is warning you now, or reminding you of the rules. Because there are rules. Ancient, unwritten ones. Every novice hears them within the first few days. Even if no one admits to saying them aloud, never speak the name of a pigment aloud. After dark. Never write when the bell tolls mid-sentence. Never let your quill dry completely before redipping. And never, ever stare at your own handwriting too long, especially if it starts to change. You think of the old amongst those who've been in the scriptorium for decades. Their hands don't shake, their eyes don't blink. They've copied the same phrases for years, and yet, you've never once seen their pages. They fold them shut the moment they're done, seal them with wax, deliver them in pairs, always in silence. You asked once what Brother Severin was working on. He smiled, but only with his mouth, said he wasn't copying anymore. He was translating. Translating what? He didn't answer, just dipped his quill again. You do the same now, asterisk. Half out of habit, half because the silence demands it. The ink clings to your quill like a spider's thread unbroken, stretching too long before it snaps. And when you lower it to the page, it doesn't drip, it slivers. A slow, deliberate mark, almost thoughtful. You try to focus. You try to resume the Psalms. De profundis clamavi ad te. From the depths I cry to you. But the lines don't stay obedient. The text is correct. The Latin unbroken. But something else slips in alongside it. A kind of echo just beneath the words. Like another voice, whispering a translation only you can hear. From the ink I rise to speak. You pause, not aloud, of course, just the feeling of the phrase. In your mind, a thread stitched just beneath the proper prayer. And it's not the first time this has happened. Several monks have gone silent in recent months. Not the kind of vow-bound holy silence, but something deeper, speechless, lips parted, but no sound. Like the ability to speak has been removed not by injury, but by replacement, as if something else has taken its place and no longer finds words necessary. One of them, Brother Male, once whispered to you in the cloister garden his breath. So faint you thought it might be wind, it's in the ink. It's listening through the black. You laughed awkwardly, gently. He didn't. He hasn't spoken since. Modern scholars often explain away these behaviors. They say monastic life, especially for scribes, caused sensory deprivation and visual fatigue. Hours upon hours of close reading, candlelight hallucinations, ink poisoning, lead-based pigments, nerve damage, all of which may be true, but that doesn't explain the margins. There's something wrong with the margins. You notice it again. Now those strange, delicate marks that keep appearing near the edges of your pages. Not errors, not doodles, more like residue. A residue of meaning. Half shapes, symbols you don't remember forming. Like when your mind wanders during prayer, and you open your eyes to find you've been drawing circles over and over. But you're not drawing, and yet the marks are growing. In the rule of Saint Benedict, there's no mention of the ink itself being holy or dangerous. It's just a tool, a medium. But other rules older, unspoken, suggest that monks were taught not to trust anything that flowed too smoothly. A quill that never needs sharpening, ink that never fades, words that arrive before you think them. Because when it comes to ice, it might not be you writing anymore. You remember the old proverb carved into the scriptorium's bench, scripta atramentum docet. The scribe writes, but the ink teaches at the time. It seemed poetic now. It sounds like a warning. You watch Brother Antonius in the corner. He hasn't moved in half an hour. The same line, over and over. You inch closer, pretending to stretch. Your legs, you glance at his page. He's written, it knows, it knows, it knows. Exactly 87 times. You retreat quickly, heart stuttering in your chest. Antonius doesn't look up. His eyes are wide open, but they're not focused. You don't even think he's blinking. You try to shake it off. You try to center yourself in the real, the logical. You remember what the older monks say. The ink can't harm you if you're not afraid of it. Fear gives it direction. Emotion gives it shape. Calm hands write clear lines. But that's the trick, isn't it? You can't be calm forever. Not with the pressure. Not with the stillness. Not when your days stretch into nights and the sun becomes a stranger. Your own work, too, has started to warp. It began last week. You were copying a genealogy of Christ, a simple lineage. But when you reached the name of David, the word came out as door. Not Latin, not Greek, Old Norse. You don't speak Norse. You don't know how to write it, but the characters had formed perfectly. As though traced by someone else's hand, the abbot took the page. He said nothing, just folded it 3 times and slipped it into his robe. His silence was heavier than any reprimand. Later that night, your fingers ached with cold despite the fire, and your fingertips were stained black. Historians still argue whether these kinds of stories of monks going mad from ink or becoming vessels for forgotten tongues are simply metaphor, allegories for the weight of divine duty, or symptoms of mercury-laced vermilion and fungal vellum. But the monks here don't speak in theories. They speak in rituals. You catch one now. A small gesture made by Brother Gervas as he dips his quill, 2 taps of the nib against the edge of the inkwell, then a tiny circle drawn in air. You realize he does it every time. You try it, 2 taps, circle, the ink doesn't bubble this time. Small victory, still, something inside you says, it knows, it notices. Even the smallest resistance is recorded. You pick up your quill again. Try to smile at your own paranoia, but the blot of ink near your thumb is already drying into a perfect spiral, the same shape that was carved into the abbot's candle last night. Asterisk, you sleep in fragments now. Not quite dreams, not quite thoughts, just flashes, the way candlelight flickers in an empty corridor, slivers of parchment floating past. A rustling sound that isn't wind, that faint smell, again damp, metallic, tinged with bitter almond. You'd swear you remember tasting it once, but that doesn't make sense. Ink isn't for the tongue, and yet here you are, chewing your lip as you wake to find another smudge at the corner of your pillow. A black dot, oily. No feather, no tip. Just the blot. It wasn't there last night. You sit up. Dawn is still hiding. Your fellow scribes are already stirring, some pretending they didn't hear the whispers in the walls, others too tired to care. You rise, you wash, you pray, and you file into the scriptorium once again, quills sharpened, backs already aching. Today's task is marginalia. You hate marginalia. Not because it's difficult, it's not. You're merely copying images into the margins of completed pages, decorative flourishes, saints, beasts, vines. But something about those empty white edges unnerves you. Too much space, too much invitation. The margins are where things hide. You've heard monks joke that demons don't like the center text, it's too full of God. But the margins, that's fair game. It's where temptation lives, where the playful meets the forbidden. Take, for instance, the snails, yes, snails. You've noticed them in dozens of illuminated manuscripts. A tiny knight doing battle with a grotesquely oversized snail. Over and over, different scribes, different regions, always the same oddity. Scholars today still puzzle over it. Some say it's symbolic slow enemies, inner demons, resurrection. Some say it's just a medieval joke. Some say it's something else entirely, a symbol they couldn't remove, even if they wanted to. And now here you are, tracing one again, but yours isn't quite right. The snail's shell forms a spiral you don't recognize. Too tight, two-dimensional. Like it leads into the page. You blink. Try again. It comes out the same way. You hear Brother Gervas whisper to himself, not a prayer. Not Latin, a single word. A trementa. You look up. A trementa isn't real Latin, but it sounds like it should be like tenebrae or vitium or maledicta. Something black and binding. You glance at his page. He's drawn a hand. Not a saint, just a hand. Reaching from the edge of the margin. Its fingers curl around nothing. But the ink at the fingertips is thick, layered, as if it were applied again and again, as though trying to pull something through. You tell yourself it's fine, you're tired. Everyone's tired. And everyone's afraid to admit what they're seeing. There's a legend. One they whisper only after Compline, in the darkest months. They say that sometimes ink holds not words, but residue traces of language long dead, prayers never answered. names never spoken aloud, that every time you dip your quill, you're touching not just pigment, but memory. And memory is hungry. That's why you must write carefully. That's why margins matter. Every monk is taught to leave exactly 2 finger widths of space at the edge, not for neatness, not even for illumination, but because too close a line invites touching, and if your text touches the edge, it may be claimed you think now of that odd page you saw last week, Brother Mail's final page before he fell silent. A genealogy of angels, supposedly, but the outer text had drifted into the margin, just barely. But that's all it took. By morning, the ink had spread off the page onto the desk. Like mold, you watched the abbot lift it with tongs and burn it, but the smell lingered for days. Historians sometimes dismiss this kind of think, call it manuscript anxiety, a medieval obsession with control, precision, order, all true, of course, but they forget how often the monks confessed fears that had no source. Shadows behind the letters, margins that whispered back, eyes in the ink. You take a break from drawing. Look up. The light slants strangely across the desk, and now you see it. Every illuminated letter on your page, the gold leaf capitals casts a faint shadow. But the shadow isn't quite aligned with the light. It's tilted, slightly off, like the letters are hovering just a hair above the parchment. Or, worse, that something beneath them is pushing up. You press your palm to the page. It's warm. Ink shouldn't be warm. You glance to Brother Gavoo's. His candle has gone out. His inkwell is dry. He's still writing. You blink again. His quill is dry, but still he writes. The page beneath him remains blank, and then, slowly, as if drawn from underneath, a line begins to appear, not written, not scratched, but revealed, like fog clearing from glass. You don't read it. You won't. Not yet. You return to your own page, your own margin. You finish the snail. It looks back at you now, more knowing than it should. And beside it, your hand on its own adds a line of text you don't remember forming. You're almost out of room. You stop. There's still space on the page, but not in the margin. Asterisk you. Tell yourself it's just a trick of the eye, a cramped neck, a flickering candle, a bit too much beeswax in the air. But the message in the margin remains. You didn't mean to write it, but there it is. You're almost out of room. It leans slightly to the left, written in your hand, but not with your intention. And now your margin is full. You run your finger along the edge of the parchment. It feels wrong, slightly raised, like the skin of a fruit just before it breaks. You remember the Abbey story, one of those cautionary tales whispered behind hands during silent meals. A scribe in Wurzburg, back in the early 1100s, who wrote, right up to the edge. His final manuscript, when unrolled, was said to have no bottom margin at all. They claimed the parchment had grown, or maybe the ink had eaten through it. No one knows, because the manuscript vanished. You set your quill down and decide to fetch more parchment from the cabinet. You need a break, a reset, something that isn't crawling with invisible tension. As you rise from your stool, your foot catches on something, a rolled scroll that wasn't there earlier. You bend down to retrieve it. No label, no seal, but it's heavy, as if inked with more than pigment. You unfurl it slightly, blank, utterly, deeply blank. You unroll more. Still nothing. Just that same oily shimmer that ink gives when it's too fresh or too old. You wonder, is this a draft awaiting its text, or a page where the text has been removed? Monks don't speak often of unrest, but the term exists. A trotto scriva to write backward. Some believe prayers written in reverse could cancel sins. Others think it's how curses were made. You roll the scroll back up. Your hands are now slightly smudged with black. You didn't touch any ink. You return to your desk. Brother Gervas is gone, not just from his stool but his presence. No books, no candle, no indentation in the bench. Just an empty space. Where's Gervas, you ask. Too loudly no one answers. Even Brother Aldhelm, who usually grumbles at any sound, is silent. You blink. Look again. Gervas's bench is still warm. You sit down quickly and pretend not to notice. You pick up your quill, dip it carefully, avoiding the odd shimmer that's formed at the surface of the inkwell. The abbot enters the scriptorium. His footsteps are soft, but every head lifts. He clears his throat. Tonight's illumination will be from the Book of Beasts, the Physiologus, a favorite among monks. Strange, symbolic animals, some real, most imagined. You're assigned the BASILISK. Perfect, another creature. No one believes in that can still kill you. You sigh and begin to draw. A coiled serpent, with a rooster's head, known to kill with a glance or with breath. It's said that only a weasel can defeat it, but you can't remember why. Your lines shake as you draw the eyes. There's a moment where you hesitate. The basilisk stares back. Its gaze is slightly off-center, not looking straight ahead, but slightly to your left, as if it's watching someone. Behind you, you don't turn around. Instead, you focus on the details, the curve of the claws, the mottled scales. You add just a touch of shading round the mouth. Then you notice something strange. The ink doesn't dry. You lean closer. The black remains wet, even after minutes. It ripples faintly when you exhale. You look to Brother Aldhelm's page. Same. BASILISK. Same wetness. His hand is trembling. He sees you watching. He mouths something across the room. Don't draw the second eye. You freeze. Too late. You already did. The second eye is complete. And now, for reasons you cannot explain, the basilisk on your page looks more alive than it should. More dimensional. Like it could be cut out and peeled away. You feel a cold pressure at your spine. You close the manuscript quickly and move it aside. You begin a fresh page. This one is worse. No matter what you try to draw letter or image, it comes out distorted. Letters curl wrong. Shapes flow into one another. At one point, a decorated Q curls so tightly that the line pierces itself and forms an accidental figure, something like a face. Open, mouthed. You swear you can hear it breathing. There's a growing superstition among your brothers that some inks, particularly those made from old oak galls and iron salts, are reactive, not just to light or heat, but to intention, that certain thoughts, if held too strongly while writing, can anchor themselves, and once inked, cannot be unwritten. Historians now debate whether this was metaphor or madness. Some say monks projected their guilt into their work. Others argue that they were simply exhausted too many hours bent over texts, too little food or sleep, but you're not so sure anymore, because the page before you just moved slightly. A wrinkle near the margin straightened out on its own. You hold your breath. Nothing else happens. You glance again at the blank scroll you picked up earlier. It's no longer blank. There's one line, written in perfect, even script. You wrote too close. The handwriting is yours, but you haven't touched the scroll since you rolled it up. You don't know what to do, so you do what you were trained to do. You keep writing. The scratching of quills becomes thunder in your ears. You try to steady your hand, but it refuses to behave. Your fingers feel distant, as though they belong to someone else. You blink hard, hoping to clear whatever's making the ink shimmer like that. It doesn't help. The basilisk page lies just beside your elbow, sealed shut with a trembling crease. You think of slipping it into the manuscript pile and pretending you never touched it. But the parchment seems to pulse slightly when you look at it directly, like it's waiting for you to finish something. You push it further away. Brother Oldhelm coughs, a soft, tight sound, like someone trying not to wake a ghost. You glance at him. He's staring at his fingers, which are smeared with ink that has dried. Blue, no green, but not like any plant or pigment you've ever used. More like the sheen on beetle wings. You think of the illuminators in southern France who experimented with crushed gemstones in their paints. Malachite, lapis lazuli. Beautiful, expensive and notoriously unpredictable. But no one in your abbey can afford those. You remember the last batch of ink Aldhelm made. He'd left it to ferment too long in a sealed jar. When he opened it, the smell was so strong that it made him retch. But he used it anyway. Waste not, want not. He said the saints would protect the words if they were righteous. But perhaps the saints hadn't been watching, or perhaps they were. There's a peculiar superstition among scribes. It's never written down, never part of the rule. Never codified in ink, but passed through glances and muttered. Warnings never work in silence so deep that you can hear the ink sink. Because if the silence is that deep, something else might be listening too. The abbey's older scribes speak rarely about the ink ghosts. Most deny believing in them, but you've heard enough to make you wonder. They're said to live in margins, in spaces never meant for words, born not from sin or sorcery, but from intention left incomplete. A line interrupted mid-thought, a prayer abandoned halfway through, an illumination that never got its gold leaf. They start as shadows, thin smudges, then curls, then figures. One legend from a monastery in Mainz tells of a monk who drew the same letter too many times, the letter S for Sanctus. He wrote it over and over on a discarded page, trying to perfect the curve. On the 7th try, the S didn't stop. It extended down the page, then coiled off it. They say he woke the next morning with an S burned into the flesh of his palm. You once laughed when you heard that. Now you don't. You examine the letter you've just drawn. An E, simple, elegant. But there's an extra curl on the top arm. It wasn't meant to be there. You try to blot it. The blot doesn't absorb. Instead, the quill lifts of its own accord, just a fraction of an inch. Just enough for your breath to catch. You snatch it back and drop it onto the desk. The abbot appears. Again his face drawn and paler than before. He holds up a page, torn, ink-stained. There's been a miswriting, he says simply. Gasps ripple across the room. Not because someone made a mistake that happens, but because he used that word. Miswriting, the scribal equivalent of a curse. The term refers to a copy so flawed that it no longer transmits the word, but distorts it, twists the original meaning into something blasphemous, even if the letters seem correct. There are whispers that certain texts have been quarantine sealed in wax and locked in cathedral vaults, not because they're heretical, but because no one can remember copying them, as though the books made themselves. One of these, the so-called ink psalter, reportedly ends with a line that reads, "The word is not copied. The word copies." You don't believe that. Not really, and yet, you find yourself writing a psalm now, not because you were told to, but because your hands are moving again. Psalm 130, you think, "The profundis clamabi ad de Domini." Out of the depths, I cry. To you, O Lord, you don't remember choosing that. You look down. Your hand continues without you. Each word is perfect, but each letter leans backward, as if receding from your gaze. A trotto scriver, writing in reverse. You jerk your hand away. The quill stabs the side of your finger. Blood blooms, quick and sharp. You reach for a cloth, anything, but instead your hand brushes a corner of the strange scroll you'd tried to ignore. It's unrolled again, not by you. This time it bears 3 lines. You crossed the margin. You drew both eyes. Now finish. What you started, you whisper aloud without meaning to. I didn't start anything. Brother Oldhelm turns sharply. His eyes are glassy, reflecting too much light. Don't say that, he hisses. That's how it finds you. What does? He doesn't answer. Instead, he reaches over and slams his own manuscript shut. You glance at his page. Just a flicker of it. The last word he wrote was ego. Latin for I. The word drips with ink. Too much ink, you blink, and realize it's not ink. It's still bleeding. You turn away before your stomach revolts. Somewhere behind you, a faint sound begins, a wet, scratching ripple, like someone drawing. With a quill on skin, the abbey bell tolls for none. You rise shakily. Time for a break, fresh air, anything to break the spell. But as you stand, you notice a faint trail, dots of dark, glossy ink leading away from your desk, like footprints. Small ones dot, and they lead straight into the archive. You follow the trail, of course you do. Against all sense, against the protest swelling in your ribs you follow. Because that's what curiosity does in monasteries. It poisons slowly, not with bold rebellion, but with careful steps. With the illusion of duty, of stewardship. You tell yourself you're simply inspecting a possible leak from an ink jar, a spillage, a draft under the doors. Something rational. You know it, ISN. Single quotes, do thy archive doors loom ahead, thick oak, bound in iron, groaning faintly in their hinges. You hesitate, then you notice it. One door is slightly ajar. That's not possible. The archive is locked at terse, opened again only. After Compline, always, without fail. The abbot keeps the key in his robe, and his robe is currently soaked in ink. You doubt he's lent it out. The trail leads through the gap. You step inside. The temperature drops instantly. No windows, just stone and scrolls, and dust. Dust that doesn't float, settles on you, on your breath. In the folds of your robe, shelves tower overhead. Carved centuries ago by monks whose names have long since vanished from the record. There's a groove in the floor where the stone has been worn down not by feet, but by the sliding of carts. Thousands upon thousands of books rolled over the same path, words moving like pilgrims. You can't hear your own footsteps anymore, because something is breathing, not heavily, not human, but steady, as if the room itself is exhaling ink and parchment. You follow the trail to a desk tucked into a far alcove, one used for transcription audits where a second monk reads aloud a copied text to ensure perfect replication. But there's no second monk here now, just a scroll, and a quill dot floating. Yes, floating, suspended in the air, held by nothing visible. The quill dips into a small pot of gleaming black. Then it begins to write dot very slowly, very deliberately. You don't approach, but you read. The script is unfamiliar at first, too angular, to narrow dot. Then you realize it's not Latin, it's Greek, but reversed. You squint. The words resolve, then crumble again. The only phrase you can hold in your mind is Gamma Rho Alpha Phi, Nu Tau Capita, writing in the mirror. Your knees go weak, because that phrase appears in only one known manuscript, the so-called Book of the Splintered Eye, lost after the siege of Constantinople in 1204, allegedly penned by a monk who could write in dreams. He claimed the ink showed him things that would happen and some that shouldn't. His last page reportedly read, "It watches us through our own handwriting." You stare at the floating quill. The breathing grows louder. The ink in the pot quivers, and suddenly it stops. The quill drops, but the scroll keeps writing, as though the words were stored inside, just waiting for space to reveal them. You stumble back and trip over something. Foot attached to a body. Brother Cadric, his eyes are open, but his pupils are gone, replaced by swirling loops of ink. His hands are curled, as though still clutching an invisible quill. Beside him lies a torn page. It bears a phrase in crisp, bright lettering: "We become legible to the things that can't be read." You crawl backward. Your fingers land on another scroll. This one blank dot, until it isn't single quotes. Words begin to crawl across the surface like beetles from a split log. You've already written too much, but not enough to finish it. A slow dread blooms in your stomach. There's a theory fringe, obscure, but whispered among a few eccentric Benedictines from Ireland, that writing, especially copying, is a form of invocation, that enough repetition of sacred language can open things. Thin walls. Between ink and spirit, it was dismissed, of course, branded scriptural animism. Nonsense, they said. Superstition for those too afraid of silence. But what if silence isn't the problem? What if ink is? You back out of the alcove, heart thudding like a stylus tapping the edge of a wax tablet. You slam the archive door shut and wedge a stool under the handle, not because it'll hold, but because your trembling hands need to do something. The rest of the scriptorium is dim now. The sky outside has gone grey-blue. Evening, you've been gone longer than you thought. You stagger back to your desk. Someone has placed a fresh quire of vellum there. You don't ask who. You sit and realize you're holding a new quill. You don't remember picking it up. The tip gleams. You want to throw it across the room, but instead you dip it in ink. The pot swirls. You expect resistance. Instead, it pulls, the nib downward. You write one letter, then another. They're not yours. They form a phrase. To end the page, you must begin the pen. It makes no sense, but you keep going. The words aren't coming from your mind, but they flow through your arm. You remember a joke Brother Aldhelm once told, months ago. What's worse than running out of ink? You had shrugged, not knowing. Who's writing with yours? You'd both laughed. You don't laugh now. Asterisk, you stare at the line you just wrote. To end the page, you must begin the pen. You didn't think of that phrase. You didn't mean to write it. And yet it sits there, perfectly formed in your own script, nestled between two faint blotches like eyes watching back. You glance down at your hand. still holding the quill, still slightly trembling. Your fingers ache, as if you've been gripping it for hours. The ink still wet on the tip seems thicker than before, oily, almost sentient. You try to set the quill down. It doesn't leave your hand. It's not stuck, exactly. But when you loosen your grip, your fingers refuse to obey. As if some part of you knows letting go would be a mistake, or worse, an invitation. You whisper to yourself, just to break the silence, you're just tired. You haven't eaten. It's nothing. But the room doesn't believe you. The flickering candlelight dances across your desk, casting letters in looping shadows on the wall behind you. Not random curls, actual scripts, whole sentences repeating and repeating in slow, tidal rhythm. You squint, trying to decipher them. The wall reads, "They learned to write without eyes. Now they need hands." You lurch back in your chair, heart thudding. Behind you, nothing stirs. But the air is thicker, humid, ink-stained, and oddly metallic. You know the superstition all scribes do, that if you dip a quill too deep, too often, in a single pot, the ink begins to know you, memorizes your rhythms, learns your hesitations. Then it writes you instead. That's why scribes used different pots each week, and why some refuse to write. Alone, still gripping the quill, you stand. You head for the cloister, somewhere open, somewhere with wind and sky and breathable air. As you walk past Brother Aldhelm's desk, you see he's fallen asleep, chin resting on his chest, ink smudging his cheek. You almost wake him, but then you see the page in front of him. It's blank dot, except for the phrase, repeated over and over. "I wasn't sleeping." That's when you notice the ink pot on his desk is empty, bone dry, and yet the nib of his quill is soaked. You keep walking through the arched corridor, past the fresco of St. Jerome, who now seems to be glaring down with unblinking intensity, clutching a scroll too tightly in his painted fists. You try not to look. You reach the outer cloister. Open air, cool night breeze. The stars above glimmer with soft indifference. You breathe, deep, ragged, trying to shake the fog. But then something strange happens. Your hand, still holding the quill, begins to move, slowly, involuntarily. It hovers over your other palm, the quill's tip trembling just above your skin. You try to pull back, but your arm is no longer entirely yours. The quill scratches a single black line across your palm, then another dot. It's writing something on your flesh. You wrest control back, throw the quill across the courtyard. It clatters against the flagstones, but the ink stays, burned into your skin in tiny looping letters, as if etched with heat. You bring your palm closer to your face. The words read, "They only fear being forgotten." That's why they write in you. You wrap your hand in your sleeve, stumbling backwards into the cloister wall. Somewhere behind you, a door creaks open. You freeze. Soft steps follow. Barefoot, not monks, sandals. You turn. Brother Cadric again, only his eyes are no longer ink-swirled. They're vacant, like a page that's been scrubbed clean with too much vinegar. He speaks, but it's not his voice. It's high, thin, dry, like parchment drying too fast in the sun. The script lives when it's remembered. You don't answer. The script dies in silence. Still, you say nothing. Then the voice softens just slightly. "Write it forward, brother. Not backward, not in mirrors. Forward." You blink. He's gone. You're alone. You look down the cloister. The doors to the library are open, now lights spilling out like honey, warm, inviting. A trick, maybe. But what else can you do? You walk. The Library isn't like the archive. It breathes differently, less secretive, more sorrowful. The candles here flicker in uneven patterns. Some bend toward you, others seem to shudder away. You scan the tables. Every scroll has been unrolled, and every page contains a name, hundreds of them. Some you recognize, brothers long dead. Others are unfamiliar. Many are your own. You pick up one scroll. It reads, Brother Alaric, Brother Marius, Brother Oswin, Brother you. The scroll ends. The last name unfinished. Just your title. No letters yet. From somewhere inside the room, a whisper, finish it. You take a step back, but something inside you knows the truth. This isn't about finishing a sentence. It's about being the sentence. And the ink isn't asking you to write anymore. It's asking to write with you.